Welcome to Politics Unplugged. I'm Ann Trujillo, and the big story this week, the fact that no one in the White House is taking credit or blame for the writing of an anonymous editorial in the New York Times that is critical of President Trump. Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Sarah Sanders, those are just a few of the people on a long list who are denying they had any part of it. The writer of the editorial claims he or she is part of a resistance within the White House staff that is working to, quote, frustrate parts of his agenda. The New York Times says it knows the identity of the writer but will not release it because it could cost him or her their job. But President Trump says the editorial is a matter of national security and the Times should put a name to the words.
Failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial. Can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020.
The New York Times says it is proud to have published the piece. And within the first 24 hours of it being published, the op-ed had 10 million views. So where's the line drawn in a case like this? The president calls it treason. Others say it is newsworthy. And here to talk about these issues with us is Metro State Professor Kip Watkins, who teaches ethical and legal issues in journalism, and Denver Post columnist Krista Kafer, who teaches public speaking at Regis University. So thank you both so much for being here. So treasonous, newsworthy, or was it cowardice?
I mean, I'm thinking it's newsworthy. It's a critical issue. What's going on in the White House right now comes right on the heels of the book being published by Bob Woodward, right, and essentially says the same thing. And in any other circumstance, it would be a national crisis. I mean, this is a very significant and extraordinary time. And there's so much of it. There's so much news coming out of the White House. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, there were all of the Cohen and the Manafort verdicts. It's really extraordinary.
So you say newsworthy, Krista?
I'm not going to say it's newsworthy. I think it corroborates everything else that we've heard. There was nothing new in that letter. I do think the person should have come forward and put their name on it. I know they would have lost their job, but it would have enhanced the credibility of the piece. I also wonder, you know, half the nation voted for President Trump. I was not part of that half, but is that person thwarting the will of the half of people in this country that did? I think that needs to be thought about.
What about the New York Times actually publishing this? I mean, I know you've researched this. This is out of the ordinary.
Extraordinary. Yes. It's rare. They believe that we're in a time of national crisis. They wouldn't have gone there otherwise. It's not without precedent. There have been anonymous op-ed pieces published before. And I would remind the listeners, for example, that when the nation was founded, James Madison, John Jay, Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton wrote the Federalist Papers anonymously for exactly the same reason, which is basically, from the New York Times point of view, does the source have a reasonable fear of personal safety or losing their livelihood? And in this case, I'm thinking, yeah.
Yeah, they would have lost their job, but I think it would have, by coming forward publicly, maybe resigning and then coming forward publicly, not only would we get more detail, obviously, because that person could be interviewed, but I think it would give some credibility. There are people on the right who think the letter is a fake. I don't agree with that, but it would certainly get rid of all of that skepticism.
Would other newspapers have printed this?
If it was named,
if it was handed to them, if you know, and this it just happens to be the New York Times as the vehicle right now, but I mean, the Washington Post has a policy of not printing anonymous op-eds.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if another newspaper. I mean, the New York Times is a journal of record, as is the Washington Post, as is the Wall Street Journal. This was a very carefully considered decision. You know, I think that, you know, I think this is a newsworthy story. I mean, think about what it's saying. I mean, it's a stunning thing to say. And by the way, one of the problems with an anonymous source is it shifts the burden away from the source in terms of credibility and on to the newspaper. the New York Times would not have taken that step lightly.
They do take risks, and they're known for taking risks, the Pentagon Papers and so forth. But I think it would have been better overall if the person had signed it. I think it would go to the credibility of it. But here's the thing, nothing in that letter is any different than anything else we've ever heard. And I don't think it'll make a difference, because if you like Trump, you're going to keep liking Trump. If you don't like Trump, you're going to keep not liking Trump.
But for your journalism students, what would you, how have the conversations gone about this topic? What would you say to your students as they look to this journalism as a career?
One of the jobs of journalism is to speak truth to power, to tell the truth. And this is a classic example of that. I mean, there could not be a better example of it right now, I think. And without fear or favor. And that's exactly what the New York Times has done.
It was a bold move. I don't know that if I were an editor, I would have made the same choice. I think I would have insisted on a name, even knowing that person would lose their job. But it is one of those tough decisions that editors make every day. And, you know, they made it. They're standing by it. Let's go from here.
Yeah, some have suggested that there was a motive to this, that it was maybe to take some pressure off of the Kavanaugh hearings, or take attention off of the Kavanaugh hearings. What do you think of that?
You know, we live in this sort of conspiratorial time, right? I mean, so, you know, I can see all of those things coming up. You know, and in a way, it does confirm, you know. For example, one of the other things that the president has said is that that Bob Woodward's book is all lies. Yeah. And I assure you that Bob Woodward's book is well researched, and he has sources and evidence behind every single one of the facts in that book. The president refers to journalists as enemies of the people. Now, just think about that for a minute. Enemies of the people. That's stunning. And we let that go by every day. Every day, you know. And these are extraordinary times. I mean, I think this is a time of national crisis.
I think the attacks on journalism have been pretty grievous and definitely unfortunate, and an injustice. I think that the press will survive, obviously. I think this president looks poorer for it. That said, the Washington Post, along with the New York Times and CNN, are pretty, they're a little slanted, I would say, to the left, and also they're very anti-Trump in a lot of ways.
Well, and some people might say that this is self-serving then for the New York Times to put this out there.
Well, but on the other hand, if you actually look at the academic research, you know, when that, you know, the press is always accused of being slanted to the left, there's just no good evidence for that. I would say they're right down the middle doing their job. The reason why it's overwhelmingly negative is because the president is overwhelmingly negative. I mean, think of this. Let me ask you this scenario, Ann. Imagine your boss here at Channel 7 acting like Donald Trump. Would they have their job?
I'm not going to go on to this discussion with you, because this is not about my job. But where do you think this will go from here? Do you think we'll ever know who wrote this?
Oh, I think that generally these things come out at some point. I think that's not unreasonable. It won't come out from the New York Times. But there is a witch hunt happening at the White House right now. I assure you.
There's definitely pressure, yes, yeah, absolutely, yes.
And it's kind of a circular firing squad at this point. So
there's going to be some rough couple of days.
A lot of people saying it wasn't me.
Yeah, a lot of folks saying, no, not me, no, not me, and so on. So, and this president, if he's anything, he will be predictably vindictive.
Well, we will wait and watch and see, because it's a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Kip Watkins and Krista Kafer. Appreciate it. Back in a moment.